First and foremost, welcome. Thank you for joining for the third session of sectional chair training. Tonight we are covering technical skills and chapter support systems. For those of you I haven't had the pleasure of meeting, my name is Marissa Schultz, and I have the pleasure of serving you as the Director of Chapter Services at the National Office. So I'm really excited to be here tonight and have a good conversation to help kick off training and this term before we are on the coattails of the school year starting. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and give a brief agenda overview before we dive into content. But before I do, I know this is the third session, so some of you may already be familiar with Teams, but there is a chat option. So if you are listening at work like Sarah or otherwise not able to participate through a microphone, please feel free to contribute through the chat. Those of you who are able to would love to see your face. Again, if you're in a space to do so and comfortable to do so, feel free to turn on your camera. Otherwise, for the best experience of everybody, if you can stay muted while we get going, that would be great. And then unmute, raise your hand, pop into conversation. This should be conversational, and I hope to hear many of you chime in throughout. So, overview of what we're going to cover tonight, starting with best practices for maintaining a positive presence with your section. So we're talking about that relationship between yourself and mostly the student members of the section you represent. We're then going to talk through the definition of a healthy chapter blueprint, what that guiding light is for chapter health and how you can keep a thumb on it. Third, we will identify and appropriately react to red flags and warning signs for those chapter health metrics. What is considered a red flag? What is considered a warning sign will help you navigate through that. And then some reporting and tools available to you. I do want to leave a good portion of this evening for Q&A so that we can talk through struggles or questions about tools to help you all be as effective as possible in the work that you're doing as a sectional chair. So with that, we are going to start with best practices for engaging with chapters. I think the most obvious piece of this is go see them when you're able. I know since 2020, the in-person engagement with chapters and on campuses has changed quite a bit, but the human element of relationship building is still really key here. Chapters are looking for connection. Our students are looking for connection. So being able to put a face to a name in a lot of ways, being able to show that you are there for them and a tangible resource can really go a long way with the chapters that you're supporting. Of course, regular communication is great to, put into place from the beginning. I've worked with sectional chairs in the past who set the expectation for their chapters from the beginning of the school year. Here's what you can expect from me communication-wise, and here's what I hope to expect from you so that we're on the same page and we're moving in the right direction. And the thing to keep in mind with communication, and we'll dive further into this with support, is communicate with them in the good moments too. The only time they hear from you shouldn't be, rats, something went wrong. Or, hey, I noticed this thing. You want to explain or, put them on the defense. Let's celebrate with them. Let's say, hey, I saw your flyer, looks great. Great work for the things that you're doing on campus. Or loved that social media post. Keep up the great work. I love that you guys are getting your message out there. Be with them in those good moments and celebrate them so that, again, they know you're there through the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? The other piece of, best practices for engagement. Casey, did I see you unmute yourself to chime in? I don't mean to put you on the spot otherwise. Okay, maybe not. I'll keep on keeping on then. Okay, so the other piece of communication is being a trusted source of knowledge. We'll talk a lot about trust throughout this evening, and I think it's really key in these pieces of engagement and having the knowledge and resources and information so that when a chapter comes to you, you're able to give them the best you possibly can, whether that is knowledge that you have yourself or pointing them in the right direction. Being a trusted source is really valuable above a lot else, knowing that they have you to confide in, again, like I said, through the good, the bad, and the ugly, um, is helpful and helps make your job as sectional chair easier. We're going to talk through more best practices coming up throughout the remainder of the comments. So you'll see them show themselves through chapter health, through these support metrics and reporting and tools available. Next, I want to dump in to chapter health. So I like to look at chapter health in 4 primary pillars. The first being membership vitality, growth and retention metrics, right? We know that chapters need to grow, and that's a pretty good indicator of how they're doing. The second is operational excellence, meeting good standing requirements, requirements of the campus, making sure their policies and procedures are fine-tuned. Third is APO engagement, participation beyond their campus boundaries. How are they getting involved not only in the organization, but on their campus? And then lastly, vision focused. So prioritizing, striving towards the organization's mission of creating more inclusive communities. So I'm going to dive further into each of these. Let's start with membership vitality. The cold hard truth of membership growth and retention is if our chapters are not growing, the fraternity at some point will cease to exist. We've already reached an incredible milestone of 100 years, and we want to ensure the future of our organization well beyond that. And that comes with the people. So when we're talking about chapter health, membership absolutely needs to be at the forefront of our minds. We need to be looking at where the chapter has been, but also where they can continue to grow. We need to help them get creative with recruitment and find new opportunities to stretch their legs a little bit further on campus every single semester, and try something new. I do see a chat pop up, so I want to be sure that I'm mindful of that. Yes, I can repeat those pillars for you. So the first one I have is membership vitality. The second one is operational excellence. Third, APO engagement. And 4 is vision focused. All right, so membership vitality, we know we need people to continue to grow the organization and see leadership, friendship, and service go on for another 100+ years. Next is operational excellence. So good standing is kind of the obvious one here. We know there's a baseline of operations that these chapters should be meeting and holding them to. So that includes things like the charter reaffirmation and completing national service event reports for National Service Week, Spring Youth Service Day, respectively, in the fall and spring. But that also includes operations on the campus side of things. Are they completing the school side of maintaining their recognition? Are they looking at their policies and procedures on a regular basis and evaluating if they still apply to the chapter's outlook? So not only does it fit where they're at now, but does it fit where the chapter is hoping to go down the road? APO engagement is probably one we could chat about for a while. We want to see chapters getting out there and doing the good, whether that be service, whether that be leading on our campuses in the fellowship among us. But typically what I'm talking about here is participation beyond campus boundaries. So are they engaging with other chapters within the section you represent? Region included, well beyond those boundaries. How are they engaging in APO, basically beyond their campus stratosphere? Are they participating in conferences? We have a number of fall conferences coming up. How are we promoting that and getting them, again, outside of that campus bubble to engage in an experience in APO that's well beyond their stratosphere? How do we lend them to a different lens of what APO could look like? APO engagement can also look different chapter-based versus member-based. So we have, and we all can probably speak to this in our own APO experiences, but there is, chapter opportunities where we can go as a chapter for inter-chapter events and do something as a group at large. And then there's those one-on-one or individual personal-based engagement opportunities where you're maybe developing yourself individually as a leader, but overall contributing to the engagement of the organization. The last one that I have here is vision focused. We all, there's a common phrase in APO, you join for the service, you stay for the people. I think a lot of us have experienced that in one way, shape, or form throughout our time in APO, undergrad or not. But we're all striving to do the same thing. We all want to create a more peaceful world. We want to do better and have a positive influence on our campus and on our communities. And as far as it relates to chapter health, keeping that in mind through the programs and processes they're developing is key. Work with the end in mind is kind of the vibe there where you want to be focused on the here and now. You want to be present, but similar to that membership vitality perspective, we want to be sure that we're looking forward, that we are projecting the longevity of the chapter, not just now, but 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, and setting up the processes and programs and procedures to get us there and then well beyond, and constantly reworking that. So membership vitality, operational excellence, APO engagement, and then vision focused are those 4 pillars of chapter health, those big buckets of chapter health. With chapter health, we know that active doesn't always mean healthy, right? Just because a chapter is active does not mean they maybe are operating to their fullest capacity within those pillars of health. So how do we recognize like I said at the beginning, red flags versus maybe growing pains? How do we navigate those indicators? And I want to break it down into quantitative benchmarks and qualitative indicators. So for those of you that are numbers people, the quantitative benchmark may speak to you a bit more. Those of you that are a bit more experiential, hang tight for the qualitative. We'll touch on both. The qualitative benchmarks that can lend you to see chapter health in a different light would be looking at year-over-year membership growth targets. Something that you all have access to in Officer Portal, and I'm going to come back to Officer Portal once we get into resources and tools. In Officer Portal, when you are logged in as the sectional chair, you can go to the reports area and access reports for the chapters you represent that range between 3 to 5 years of membership data. So that's not only looking at what has the chapter currently welcomed for new members, initiates, active members, etc., but what did last year look like? What did the year before that look like? If you are a pivot table person like I am, those spreadsheets may make your heart happy. But you can toy with the data there and see, all right, how is this chapter performing this year compared to last year, the year before, and so on, and can be a really tangible tool to see, all right, are we trending up? How can we keep that momentum? Or are we trending downward and maybe need to switch things up so that we can turn the tide in the positive direction? Retention rates are, of course, another piece of that. So not only how many members are we welcoming, how many are we getting through the door, but how many are we keeping? It's great to see a pledge class come through that is maybe challenging the status quo of a chapter, those growing pains type numbers. But what are you keeping from that? How are you able to not only show them the value of APO to get them in the door, but make them want to stay? They maybe join for the service. How do you get them to stay for the people or the leadership, or, insert the piece that's valuable to them? But retention is a piece that we want to keep in mind, not only after the ceremony happens, but from that initiate experience. What are we looking semester to semester? What does active membership retention look like from the fall semester to the spring semester, and even the spring semester to the next academic year through graduation? Is the chapter able to bounce back from a graduation class? We should keep that in mind when we're looking at those targets. Another quantitative benchmark here is good standing. I'll come back to this a couple times. We know there are a few elements to good standing. So the charter reaffirmation due in the fall and the spring, in the fall, November 15th, and then in the spring, March 15th. That's completed by the chapter president, must be reviewed and approved by the advisory chair. And then, of course, AMDs, active membership dues, result through that form confirming the active member roster. So charter reaffirmation is a portion of good standing. We also have National Service Week and Spring Youth Service Day reporting. Chapters being able to share out yes or no, we did or did not participate in this event. And if they did, sharing more. What did they do? Tell us your story. Tell us the impact that you had on your campus and in your community through this project. Beyond the charter reaffirmation, National Service Week, and Spring Youth Service Day, there is a maintenance of not-for-profit status. That could look like a couple things depending on the chapter. So some of you may be familiar with chapters having school checking versus external banking. Our chapters that have school checking, typically fall under the university's tax umbrella, meaning the chapter does not have to file its own taxes annually as a subordinate of Alpha Phi Omega. It's not 100% of chapters with school checking that fall under the school's EIN, but vast majority of them do. So we have that side of things where the not-for-profit status is ultimately handled by the school. And then the alternative is a chapter who banks through maybe a local financial institution and is responsible for maintaining their own not-for-profit status. So that looks like a chapter. Typically at the time of chartering, so many of our established chapters already have and maintain this status, but they apply for a tax ID or an EIN, employee identification number, through the IRS, indicating that they're a subordinate of Alpha Phi Omega. And that tax ID or EIN is something that they must file annually at a date that varies chapter to chapter, but generally, maintaining their not-for-profit status requires that filing. And it's a lot less complex than, filing personal taxes or business taxes. But that is a status that they have to maintain as part of good standing. So we have charter reaffirmation, National Service Week, Spring Youth Service Day, and not-for-profit status. There's also a requirement for advisors. We recently had a change in the number of advisors required for active chapters. As a result of the 2025 convention, chapters were previously required to have 2 faculty staff advisors, 1 community advisor, and 1 scouting/youth services advisors. One of those 4 or an additional 5th would serve as the advisory chair. So we had an advisory committee that they had to have as the baseline for advisors. Based on legislation from the last convention, that has changed. That now looks like 1 campus advisor, so faculty, staff, administrator, and 1 fraternity advisor, both serving as respective experts on campus or in the organization. Any advisor that does not fit within those 2 job descriptions would then serve as an at-large advisor, where their duties as they serve the chapter are defined by the chapter. They get to decide, hey, this is the way that we need you to serve our group. Then Last but not least, we have financial requirements. So chapters are to not be more than 90 days delinquent with their financial accounts with a national organization. For our school checking chapters, this is a little asterisk on that good standing note. School checking chapters are typically at the will of the school for submitting invoices and getting payment to the organization. That can look like a number of things for each institution, but generally speaking, the organization does not hold chapters to a process that's outside of their control. So when we're looking at good standing for a chapter that does have school checking, that financial piece of good standing is is flexible because we know that the chapter is at the will of the school and what their process is. They may have a minimum of 2 weeks processing from the point of submitting an invoice to getting something paid. Could be more, could be less. Again, it depends on the school. So in summary, good standing. Charter reaffirmation, National Service Week, Spring Youth Service Day, not-for-profit status, advisors, and invoices. There are plenty more pieces of best practices for chapters that absolutely contribute to their health, but based on our policies, that is good standing. We know to be true that chapters should be welcoming new members semester after semester, I should say year over year, as we know some groups may not be able to recruit in the fall or spring, depending on their campus. But good standing, bringing it back to where we were, these quantitative benchmarks, good standing compliance and being able to track that is key. Here's the piece of good standing that I'll also add is chapter administration can be silent when it slips. So being able to maintain a healthy relationship with the chapter to remind them of those deadlines is a great use of time because we don't want administration to be the reason why a chapter, falls into a more critical health state. We want them to be timely and be on top of their paperwork and it not be a barrier to them serving their campus and serving their community and focusing where they should on leadership, friendship, and service. The other quantitative benchmarks that we can look at are event participation. Are they going to interchapter events? Are they participating in conferences? Are they attending convention? Looking at participation in areas like that can help identify where they're at on the spectrum of chapter health. And then alumni engagement. It's a piece that I think often gets overlooked, but all of us as alumni, we bring value to the organization. We have a lot of institutional knowledge, experiential knowledge that we can offer and help us excel in the next 100+ years of the organization. And I think that absolutely applies to the chapter experience in a similar fashion to the mentorship and guidance that advisors provide. Alumni too can help them build relationships and get them connected, not only on campus, but in their communities and spaces where a student may not otherwise get connected. So those are some of my points for the quantitative benchmarks when we're looking at chapter health. I do want to pause and ask, as far as chapter health is concerned, where we're at now, are there any questions or comments that people wanted to throw into the chat or offer in their experience? Feel free to raise your hand or unmute and jump in. All right. Seeing none, if you happen to be typing, feel free to keep typing and pop in the chat. We're still hanging with chapter health for a little bit more, but I'm going to move into some of the qualitative indicators when we're looking at chapter health.
I do have one question about what do you think are some of the best ways that chapters can be engaged in finding new advisors?
Great question, Emma. So just to repeat the question, good ways that chapters can be engaged with finding advisors. The advisor recruitment process can sometimes be a long process. Being able to source those individuals to serve the chapter can be a challenge, but often what I suggest is starting with as big and wide of a list as a chapter can. So, building your names list is what I like to call that, of jotting down anybody on campus, depending on the type of advisor you're looking for, anybody on campus, anybody on the community, in the community that is already maybe a champion of APO or a champion of the chapter or a student's leadership within the chapter, anything related, you know? Um, I would start with that big list and go through a high level screening process. Would this person be a good fit? Does their life circumstance maybe allow for this type of involvement in the organization? And start navigating through that list until you maybe have a core of, let's say, 3 to 5 that you would maybe want to outreach and invite them to participate in something if they're not already. Invite them to participate, build a relationship with the chapter before you just throw an ask right out there. And once that relationship is established, throwing out the possibility of, hey, what would it look like, or what are your thoughts, I should say, on serving as an advisor for the chapter? Have that conversation. They may politely decline, but they may accept and be able to move forward with that. But in a nutshell, I would say start with building your names list, um, and also use your campus as a resource. They have folks that are usually in the pipeline lined up to serve as advisors for student orgs and could be a pretty straightforward way for a chapter to tap into a network that they don't already have.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome, Emma. Kaylin has a question in the chat. How should an EIN revocation be addressed? So let me first explain. EIN being revoked, so that tax ID or not-for-profit status being revoked, is an action from the IRS. And that is an action that takes place when a chapter has not filed their chapter taxes in 3 years' time. So if they lapse in filing for 3 or more years, the IRS will typically revoke their tax ID and that not-for-profit status. So just a little clarity on the front end of that question. How should an EIN being revoked be addressed? So that is something that one has to be resolved with the IRS. There is a process for getting it reinstated. There's a form that has to be completed, and typically that form comes with a fee, usually in the ballpark of $250, could be up to $400. However, depending on the nature of why the EIN was revoked, the IRS has flexed that fee. Basically, if the chapter took, let's say, quick action after it was revoked and was able to show legitimate cause for why they did not file and show proactive measures that they will not get in this position in the future, then we have seen that flexed. But it really depends. It all starts with completing that form to get it reinstated. As a sectional chair, approaching that, like if you're aware of it and the chapter may not be for whatever reason, then I would say approaching it with constructive conversation. I would be intentional the way you approach it as to not put the chapter on alarm. It's something that needs to be addressed, but you definitely don't want to put them on the defense with something like that. So saying, hey, there's been a letter or a received notification that the EIN was revoked for the chapter. I have collected some resources to be able to help you through reinstating that. So let's set up time to talk about what that looks like. Once it's revoked, what's done is done. So really the most fruitful path forward is not only helping them through reinstatement, but helping them create the processes so that they adopt regular filing into their annual practices. A couple good questions there. Anything else on quantitative benchmarks? Good standing, maybe? Charter reaffirmation, National Service Week, Spring Youth Service Day, items like that. If not, we'll keep on moving on. And if something comes to mind, we'll have plenty of time here soon to ask away. Seeing none, we'll keep going. So some qualitative indicators of chapter health. Leadership transition, officer transition. We know that is a spectrum. We see anything from nothing, an officer being thrown into a position, to some fine-tuned transition, big group discussions, one-on-ones that are comprehensive, handing over of materials, passwords, contact lists, you name it. I think the spectrum of officer transition is often reflective of overall chapter health. Not always, but typically. Chapters that experience transition as a quick, I'm thrown into a position. It's not uncommon for us to see chapter health on the lower end of the ideal spectrum, because those systems are not in place to help their leaders be the best leaders that they possibly can be. Again, it's not a perfect equation, but it is often indicative of chapter health. The other piece, and APO engagement, we come back to it every time, but interchapter relations, are they involved in APO beyond their campus? And on their campus, what's their reputation? Do they have partnerships with other organizations, other offices on campus? Is the Office of Student Affairs aware of the organization, or insert another department that maybe has knowledge and information about APO's existence? How are they building their reputation on campus and putting it out there for those to know who they are, and understand APO for what it's worth? And then the last one that I have here is internal conflict. How a chapter navigates conflict can be pretty telling. There was a point in time where we could definitely say that a chapter, I should say, that's 10 to 15 members is one major conflict away from potentially closing. Group dynamics, when conflict isn't addressed appropriately, can be pretty volatile. So being able to see how they address conflict and giving them the tools to have candid conversations, to have constructive conversations, is a really great tool to help them adopt, not just in APO, but generally as adults. So helping them navigate that. I'm going to pause here quick and again open it up to see any questions or comments, experiences that anyone wants to share about chapter health, and some indicators or benchmarks that have served you well in your time as a sectional chair so far. I know for some of you the term is early.
I can jump in real quickly with some additional thoughts, if that's okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Luke.
Yeah, sorry everyone for my late arrival tonight, but I've been sitting in the background letting Marissa do her thing. I think on one of the more recent points on leadership transitions, I think that historically this is where we see a lot of chapters break down, is that gap between officers, whether it's little bits and pieces at a time. They forget to exchange the advisor names or explain what that role is, or maybe there isn't a transition and the new president is rewriting chapter tradition from the start, or there's no explanation of fraternity structure. It can be little things over time that, if they're not maintained and if the chapters don't have support in doing so, eventually cause chapters to become insular, fall apart, and disconnect from the idea of APO. So it's kind of like a forgotten in a lot of cases. Critical point of being an officer is also getting the next person ready And especially since they can happen at the end of the semester, it's really easy for them to be missed and for us to miss that checkpoint with our chapters. So I always just like to provide a little extra highlight on that one.
Thanks for that, Luke. I appreciate it. Yeah, leadership transition is a big piece to chapter health. So we can see, the groups that are reinventing the wheel or the things that slip in transition and that they have to relearn. If we can button up officer transition, imagine how chapters can propel themselves into the future, having not lost institutional knowledge and information that serves them well. Okay, so some of the pieces of chapter health, aren't glaringly obvious when things don't go right. We're talking about officer transition right now. We may not recognize a clunky officer transition. It may not be, the downfall of a chapter the first semester that it happens. So, how do we read between the lines and recognize those early warning signs to get in front of problems before they truly arise? Communication patterns are a big tell for chapters very often, or for students in general. So in the beginning, I mentioned checking in with chapters regularly. If you have a maintained schedule of checking in with the leaders that you represent, then the frequency and quality of those check-ins, if it changes from what you know to be the baseline, that's something worth noting. That could be an early warning sign. Maybe the frequency of your check-ins is much longer and you're not seeing them as often as what you would expect, or the quality of those check-ins. If the students are generally disengaged and not as participant in those conversations or connection points, then again, that can be a tell of, hey, something might be up. Could be personal, could be chapter based, but is worth a, hey, are you all right? How are things going? Tell me about why this meeting maybe feels a bit different than when we met the last few times. Response times are similar in fashion, where if you are used to hearing from someone more frequently, or they are responsive, reply to emails within a day or a week or whatever is expected, and that changes, you don't hear from them for a while, whatever the case may be, tuning into that to follow up and also check in, hey, is everything all right? And coming from a place of understanding first and foremost. Tone shifts could be an indicator. Again, as you build relationships and build trust with students, you may be in tune with when their tone changes, if their behavior in general changes, or how they speak, when they speak, etc. And being able to clock what silence actually means. Silence could be a cry for help. Silence could be, I'm so stinking overwhelmed, I don't know where to turn. Being in tune with that can help you, like I said, get ahead of some more that's to come and hopefully turn the tide in whatever may be going on with the chapter. On the flip side of communication, you could see some behavioral indicators, meeting attendance patterns, again, showing up versus not showing up. Event planning consistency is the quality of what they're doing, meeting what you would expect from the chapter. Their financial management trends, that tax EIN, or just generally how they handle their funds. How is that going? And their officer engagement levels. Are their officers tuned in? Are they leading the chapter? Are their members looking to those leaders for strategy and guidance throughout the semester? That can be an indicator that helps you support the chapter differently if you're seeing them arise. Now, when you notice some of these benchmarks or patterns that are maybe telling to a different story than what you're used to with the chapter, what are some intervention strategies that could be helpful? I already alluded to the soft check-in approach. Hey, how are things going? I'm here if you need me. Building trust before problems arise help that immensely. If you're working with students that have trust in you, whether it's as a knowledge source or a confidant, then those soft check-ins or even not so soft check-ins land a bit differently than if that trust isn't there. So being present and establishing yourself as a support person, a support system for the chapter helps in a number of ways, but at least in as far as chapter health, when things maybe are turning, they may be more receptive to hearing from you. You're creating that safe space for honest communication, for candid feedback, candid discussion, so that you can properly intervene and help be effective in your support. Luke, I want to throw out if you have any tips and tricks for, intervention with chapters that, their health may be struggling that you've seen in your experience as a regional chair or within the sections that you helped lead as well.
Yeah, I think you hit on a lot of the notes that I would have called out. I think just to reemphasize some of the bigger ones, quick snaps and changes of communication are a big indicator. That's I had the unfortunate experience of closing almost a quarter of my chapters when I was region chair due to uncomfortable overlapping scenarios, and that was one of the most common situations. We go from communicating with the chapter president there, and even in the face of issues, they're communicative, interested in being a part of the solution, everything like that, and then halfway through the semester, they're gone. I think one thing that would have been beneficial, would be reaching out to other campus supporters. If you do have a chapter representative or a liaison who's there, that's it. They're a great tool, but odds are in this scenario, they're probably getting the same feedback or lack thereof that you are. Advisors are great to connect with, especially their faculty advisor, or I think that we have probably have a decent number of chapters that also tend to have relationships with alumni that aren't necessarily in a specific role, but are just friendly to the chapter that can also, if you have that cultural knowledge, can help you kind of get an inroad with the chapter. But I think to Marissa's point, like pre-intervention is definitely a lot better than reactionary intervention. So in the sectional chair role, that's why it's really tantamount to the role to get into into your chapters, let them know your name and that you exist, that the role exists, because they might not even know that. And just maintain, that friendly, present atmosphere with them. I'll add that coming in with an air of flexibility and understanding goes way further than coming in and getting upset about paperwork. Not that I think anyone on this call would do that, but if students, I think, again, speaking from personal experience, both as a regional chair and supporting sections, but also as a student from knowing other chapter members, throwback. A lot of times when things went wrong, the students were upset with themselves and felt uncomfortable reaching out, and not necessarily due to any part on the section chair for making an environment uncomfortable. It's just, as we know, college is a time of growth and development, and for a lot of folks, it tends to hit harder when they feel like they've failed at something. I think it's just important to come in with that air of like, I am your friend and your resource, and I want to make sure that you're okay and that your chapter's okay. And everything else that Marissa said tonight. But I think that really helps. And that way, even in a reactionary standpoint, the chapter officers are more comfortable saying like, hey, I messed up. I missed the deadline. I need help. Rather than you waiting for paperwork to get submitted 3 months late and then seeing nothing and then having a new e-board to work with.
Thanks, Luke. Appreciate those notes. So when we're talking about intervention and support strategies, one of the things to keep in mind is supporting a critical chapter is most likely going to look very different than supporting a chapter that is high performing. I would say, and Luke, feel free to chime in on this timeline on what you've seen most beneficial. But I would say at a baseline, sectional chairs should be checking in with every chapter at least once a month. That's your baseline for connection, whether it be for administration or a general, hey, how's it going? Once a month, and then catering to the spectrum of health from that baseline. So, for example, if you have, let's say, a steady state chapter that's maintaining healthy operations, isn't doing anything exponentially excellent where they may be, growing by a lot or, doing anything well above the standard, but also is not in a critical state. They're doing the things, they're doing it well, and they're doing APO, right? That may be your baseline of once a month. Then you may have your critical chapter, your under 10 to 15 members who kind of have a grasp on good standing, don't really engage with APO beyond their campus dynamic, and maybe have lost sight of the fraternity's vision or their chapter's vision. That may be a group that you're checking in with biweekly. If you have a plan in place for helping them get to more of that steady state, it could be more frequently than biweekly. Depends on the needs. That's not to say, there's an unwritten expectation that you're checking in weekly, but being able to tailor it to the chapter's needs. Maybe it does need once a week, depending on those student leaders or what the situation is. But, that's dependent on their scenario. That's a way that you may deviate from that like once a month baseline. Your high performing chapters, it could be less than once a month. I would still encourage hey, hi, how's it going, folks? Still here. Good to see you're doing the things, find an opportunity to connect, engage, even if it's not necessarily like down to business engagement. It could simply be, hey, I see you all. You're doing a great job. Love that social media campaign you had, or congratulations to the new officers. I'd love to get in front of them to meet them, whatever day. But still giving them a shout out that you're there, even if they may not need your direct support as frequently as a critical chapter. Luke, what do you think about that once a month and then deviating as needed?
Yeah, I think that that's a really appropriate perspective. I'll add a little bit for chapters both on the top and bottom of that spectrum. I think the 10 to 15 threshold for a chapter is a good number to set as like maybe give them a little bit of an extra visit or two. But outside of that, I would also look at, membership trends semester over semester. If you had a chapter start out at 200 and then all of a sudden a year later they're at 80, that's not close to the that 10 brother threshold.
Sound
but
the
that should
alarms.
Yes, yeah. A 60% drop in membership for a 200-person chapter should raise a lot of bells. Maybe the university divested a campus, maybe they've seen shrinking admissions, maybe the chapter is just resizing. Whatever it is, or maybe there's more restrictive rules on campus. Whatever it is, it's best for you to understand the reason rather than to just say, well, they're still at 80, so it's fine. Because going from 200 to 80 in a year means you can go from 80 to 0 in less than a year. So you definitely, obviously don't want to see that happen. And lost my train of thought for a second there on the decrease. Oh, in any case, I think this goes for the smaller and larger chapters. If they've been at a number consistently for a period of time, whatever that chapter size is, 25, 80, 200, whatever, if they start seeing dramatic changes, it means that they are probably going to have trouble fitting to the old model of their chapter. A 200-person chapter might have a 15-person e-board and 20 minor roles. And at 35, that's still under 20% of their chapter. That might work for them. But if you're down to 40 and you're still trying to fill 35 roles between e-board and minor board, that's not going to cut it. And then same thing in reverse. If you have chapters that are growing exponentially and they're jumping from 20 to 60 to 100 over a couple semesters or a couple of years. First off, that's awesome. Write down what they're doing and send it to literally everyone you know because we'd love to know. But past that, the issue is less on, hey, are they on a downward trend? Because obviously they're not. But the two things that I would look at, one are is their chapter programming and their positions and their bylaws, are they all right sized to their chapter? Did they have an e-board of 2 leading 20 people, and now they have an e-board of 2 trying to lead 100? That's going to be really rough, and you're going to lose those two brothers super quickly. And then I think manageable growth on that side is something else to just keep an eye on. Check in every once in a while. Hey, how do you feel you're doing? Is everyone still showing up? Do you feel like anybody's disconnected after, they pledged, they were initiated, and then they immediately dropped off the map? Talk retention. I think in a lot of scenarios, it's not just changing up the timing of your visits, but also what that key conversation piece is. Is it recruitment, retention, something else? But pulling it back to just the timing on either end, there can be reasons to check in more frequently. And I think, Marissa, you said it well. Hey, hi, how are you? I still exist. Especially larger chapters that tend to operate really well on their campus, but only on their campus. They don't come to conferences. They don't talk to you very often. It's really good for you to be a reminder consistently that like there is an Alpha Phi Omega outside of their chapter. Because those are the chapters that we really want to see taking, if they're comfortable, like a leadership role within their section and their region, and supporting, elsewhere if they can.
On that note, and speaking to what Luke shared, one of the best things you can do as a sectional chair is get to know your chapters. Get to know what is typical so that when the atypical arises, you recognize it. Get to know, and that looks qualitative and quantitative. You can start with what's available on paper. You can get into Officer Portal and pull the reports until your heart is happy to look at all of the variations of membership numbers and information that's available. And if you're not an Excel spreadsheet kind of person or a data person asking for support to look at that, but get to know your chapters. Get to know what is typical behavior reporting wise. Get to know what is typical behavior for them to show up beyond their campus. What's typical for communication, what's typical for recruitment and retention, and all of these different practices. Some of that you can do independently with the tools that are available to you. The Officer Portal and the reports area in there can lend you to some information that's very telling about where a chapter is and where they have been, and then following that up with conversations. Hey, I'm trying to, understand the history and the now of your chapter. Here's what I'm seeing on paper. Tell me the story. What do you know about your chapter now and its recent past to help you connect the dots for what you're seeing, and you're able to either validate what you're seeing on paper or not, because quite honestly, we know a chapter on paper is very different than a chapter in person, and they tell two different stories. So you've got to find somewhere in between, but get to know your chapters is the best tool that you can have in your pocket to serve you now and your predecessor down the road when you transition from this role, to say, hey, here's what you can expect from them now, but here's also where they've been, because that matters. So part of this, I'm going to go through tools and resources a little quickly because I do want to give some time for questions. One of the things I've mentioned Officer Portal a few times, and without sitting down in a virtual space and doing an Officer Portal training together, if Officer Portal is not a place where you are super comfy navigating, I encourage you to visit the fraternity's YouTube page. We have a playlist that is for Officer Portal tutorials. It covers anything from how to submit graduates to creating an account to completing certain forms. It's very helpful in understanding the student experience and how they navigate Officer Portal. I've included a link in the chat to that playlist. If YouTube is a place where you like to learn, I very much so encourage you to go there for bite-sized trainings that range from like 45 seconds to maybe 2 minutes at most. But good bite-sized information for you all. And also feel free to share this with your chapters. Great tool for them as well. Officer Portal for reporting, I mentioned it. When you're logged in, go to that reports area. And if it's not a place you've explored or don't feel comfortable exploring solo, please feel free to reach out to myself so I can help you understand what's available to you. I'm more than happy to do one-on-one trainings, or here's how to use Officer Portal maybe a little differently to understand your chapters better. Happy to look at that together. Before we close tonight, I'm going to throw my email in chat, and of course you'll get it in a follow-up. So anything that doesn't get addressed that you maybe want to spend some one-on-one time, happy to do that. Officer Portal is a great tool. The people here, all of your sectional chairs, great tools. People are wonderful tools. We love them. Myself and Luke, your regional chairs are absolutely wonderful to lean on for support with chapters, for understanding chapters and what their history looks like. And then the national office is here to support you as well. If you have a question about a report or need data that maybe you don't feel is readily available to you, we're happy to point you in the right direction and get you the information that will help you do your job as best as you possibly can. Luke, do you have any final remarks to add before I open it up to questions about chapter support and, being the best supportive sectional chair you can be?
I guess, sorry, I'm peeking at your outline, using it to help me. I think something I didn't jump in on before, but that I'll just go back to, in terms of those 4 pillars of chapter health, the one I would just like to give a little highlight for y'all is vision focused. So for those of y'all who had some of your chapter leaders attend the Chapter Presidents Academy this past weekend, that we talked a lot about starting with why, if anyone's a fan of Simon Sinek, giving him credit there. But if anyone's a fan of that idea or being vision focused, strategic thinking for the future, that's a lot of what we discussed this weekend and tried to instill in the students. So for those of y'all with students who attended, coming back to your section or to your region, that's some of the verbiage and mindset that you can expect to come back with them. So don't be afraid to really lean into that and help them develop that sort of vision-focused mindset. More details from your region chairs coming out, but just wanted to make that shameless plug now that those students will be coming back to your chapters.
Thanks, Luke. All right, before we close our time together, I do want to open it up if there are any questions. Feel free to dive into the chat box, or if you're able, unmute yourself and pop in with any questions you have for Luke or myself. All right, one in the chat. How would you approach a chapter that has an open invoice, meaning unpaid, from the previous semester? Financial operations are the area I'm the least comfortable with, so I know I can see invoices, but not sure if there are ways to see if a payment is still processing. Good question, Colin. By and large, I would say if a payment was sent, it would be processed. It typically, if a payment is sent, whether that be a physical check or an electronic payment, it's typically processed within 1 to 3 business days. There is not a way to see like if the physical check was received at the office and is, in the pipeline to be processed. However, I would say approaching the chapter that has an open invoice is, it depends on where you're at with that already. If you're still in like a soft approach of, hey, this is something I recognized, I want to bring it to your attention. Does the chapter have a plan to get this taken care of? If it is a school checking chapter, that might look different. and could be still that soft check-in approach, but hey, has the chapter done everything it needs to do to submit the invoice to campus and get payment from the school for this invoice? So more about, have you submitted the paperwork to the school to make sure they remit payment in a reasonable amount of time? If it's a brick and mortar banking kind of a chapter situation, then they usually have more readily available access to their funds, and leaning into that, hey, do you have a plan to get this taken care of as soon as possible?
Yeah, if I can add a little bit as well, I think the last bit that you said, at coming in ready to ask, like, okay, if they say, no, we haven't done it, prompting, all right, what's your plan? And then when they say we don't have one, it can't hurt to come in with a couple of fundraising options and recommendations as well, or, be prepared to have a conversation about their due structure and budget with them too. So, it could be helpful to do a quick, like, 2-minute flow chart on the back of a napkin. Like, if they don't have this, if they just sent the check and it's not uploaded, we can cut the conversation. But if not, these are the ways it can go so that you can be ready.
And also at a baseline, make sure they know how to make payment. It's possible that they don't, and they can go into Officer Portal in the dashboard area, click the link to make a payment, and make electronic payments with a card there. So maybe it starts with making sure they know how, especially if there's been some leadership transition, but otherwise I would lean into both ends of what Luke and I shared there. Next question, Aaron, do you have tips for getting chapters to engage each other? Man, such a great question. I could answer it 32 different ways, but I think it all comes down to finding what is valuable to that chapter and to its members to prompt engagement. It could be that despite receiving those conference or other event invitations, they don't see the value. Being able to find like micro engagement efforts that matter to them. You hear a conversation about, oh, we want to do a project with this new organization. Hey, one of these other chapters does that. Let me set up a call where you can pick their brain about it. Or there's other ways to kind of plant seeds in formulating those relationships, in much more smaller, maybe more intimate, but comfier settings than here, go to this event where you are very much so put into maybe an unknown campus, an unknown community with unknown people. It can be totally out of their element. So if you can bite size it, that approach in a way that's valuable to the chapter, we've typically seen yield better results.
Yeah, and I think that bite-size approach is probably the best way. If you have another chapter on the opposite end in your spectrum that's like chomping at the bit to do literally anything with any other chapter, once assuming the isolated chapter, if you think they'll be receptive, once you know how to meet them where they are in terms of events and interaction that they value, you can facilitate, hey, you know, you said you really like volunteering at your local animal shelter. The chapter in the town over is looking to get that started. Can you help them and see if you can get them to not just come to events, but to, they say that one of the best ways to endear people to you is to ask them for help, and then that can help build that connection. So it can almost work on the chapter level as well. Again,
Absolutely.
if they're in a place and comfort zone of doing that.
Yeah. Next question in the chat, how should we approach if there's a chapter invoice that says the chapter is owed money, meaning a reimbursement? So this circumstance would be if a chapter overpaid on an invoice, they have a credit shown on their account. If they are ready to use that credit towards an invoice for pledge fees, initiate fees, active membership dues, whatever it might be, they should notify the national office. We will apply it and it'll take that amount off their bill. Good question, Michaela. Everybody, great questions.
So I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So a lot of my chapters, they're pretty terrible at reporting on Officer Portal and updating their Officer Portal.
Sure.
And there's one in particular that has pledges and that haven't been initiated, and
Mhm.
the year says 2018. So I'm currently wondering what to do with them. I don't know if they had been initiated in 2018. I don't know if it was accidental, they clicked the wrong date or something, but I'm wondering how I should approach that and what the process is. If they were initiated and it was 2018, do they have to do back reporting and do they have to pay for them?
All great questions. Complex situation, right? If you're able to get more information from the chapter on, hey, did these people initiate? If they have that information, 2018, it's likely people that our current members may not have engaged with at a point in their active membership. Their memberships may not have collided, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
So I would try to get as much information from the chapter as you can on what that person's involvement looked like. Did they initiate? And then from there, as far as the back reporting piece, um, Jaden, I don't know if you've worked directly with Bree Berry, our chapter services specialist at the office, but if you all have the information, especially for that many years of back reporting, we will help take the lift off the doing in officer portal is to make it as straightforward as possible. We could take a spreadsheet and be able to apply it.
Mhm.
So if you can get some information from the chapter, and I'll make a note in my notebook today to have Bree maybe follow up with you to
Okay.
see how she can support streamlining that.
Okay. Sounds good.
Good question. All right, Chaz in the chat, with a chapter on a large campus struggling with membership numbers, what recruitment efforts have you seen to be successful? Good question. A large campus struggling with membership is not a scenario you would expect, right? You think more people, more opportunity to engage. Um, they should do a needs assessment as best they can on that campus to see the things that students engage with. And you may be able to go to um, the campus engagement office or equivalently named office on campus to get more insights on what events and happenings are students participating in and interested in on campus, and have the chapter find a way to support those events. If athletics are very big on this campus, how can the chapter be more present in those spaces? If the arts are more popular on your campus, how can they support the shows that may be happening or the displays of arts that's happening, whether that be cleanup before or after an event or helping guide people through campus for some kind of display. Find the things that the students like and be there, be present. It may not be setting up a table to build a names list. It is out in the field, building relationships and being present where the people are.
Yeah, I think to add to that, some of the maybe most of the best recruitment happens outside of Rush for those exact reasons. It's establishing, like you said, Marissa, that unique value proposition on the campus. Why am I joining APO and not Habitat or Doctors Without Borders or whatever, XYZ? I think something that a couple of officers this weekend, actually, at Chapter President's Academy mentioned was doing mixer service events with other orgs on campus. Even if they're not necessarily service related organizations, but other orgs that have a service requirement, partnering with some of the business societies or professional honor societies and things like that, some of the social Greeks, and getting visibility for the chapter on campus can really go a long way. And I think to add to that as well, on an even more in between rush level, assessing the programming of the chapter, making sure that it looks appealing to somebody who's considering joining as well. You know, if they say, hey, join APO, we develop leaders through community service, and somebody comes up to the table and says, great, how do you do that? And they say, well, every night we drive an hour away to do community service in the county next door, and then we come back and then we have meetings on Sundays. That is probably not going to appeal, you know, to a wide array of students who might be more comfortable, especially on a large campus with a variety of things to do within a 15-minute walk. Yeah. And you did, Marissa.
You would think by now, with all of the video calls we all do, what I was saying was seeing no other chats come through, and I do want to be mindful of time here. If folks have any other questions, you are more than welcome to throw them in the chat. I will hang around for another 5 minutes or so. Feel free to stick around, but otherwise, I do want to get things wrapped up because I want to stay as close to time as possible for you all. I know it's a late night so far for our East Coast folks. So with that, first and foremost, thank you all for joining and listening in wherever you are in the space that you're able to. I appreciate the questions. I appreciate your willingness to listen to what we have to share, and look forward to working with you all in the academic year ahead. So if you're able, or if you have a question that you haven't asked yet, feel free to stick around. But otherwise, it was a pleasure having you all here, and I look forward to engaging with you all before long. Have a good rest of your night.
Thanks, everyone.